great pleasure to be here today. I'm going to tell you about how some of my ideas have developed on the basis of many decades of research. I started doing research before most of you were even born, okay? Which makes some of my ideas maybe a bit out of date, but I also have a lot of experience to go on, so balances out. Okay, I'm going to talk today about early experience, education, common prosperity, and the risk of nation. Now, a nation's success depends upon the capabilities of its population. So nations invest in education. So schools improve the well-being of nations. However, what happens before school is also very important for the development of children throughout their lives. Early experience affects children's development in terms of educational attainment, socio-emotional development, employability, criminality, mental and physical health. These factors affect the global competence of the whole population and hence the success of a nation. Achieving good development for all children means greater productivity and also social justice. That is what we mean by common prosperity, which is a big aim of the Chinese government. Now, there are consistent links between socioeconomic status and children's development. Here we see the population in the UK divided up into quintiles, that is 20% bands. So the green is the bottom 20% by income, then the next 20%, then the next 20%, and so on. And then the light blue is the top 20% by income. And we can look at what happens before school. School readiness at 3, vocabulary at 3, vocabulary at 5. And we see there's a regular, consistent relationship whereby the higher the social status, the higher the level of development of the child. But if we look at negative aspects of development, like conduct problems and hyperactivity, we see a reverse, whereby you get higher negative aspects of development with lower socioeconomic status, okay? So socioeconomic status is a powerful factor affecting children's development. One of the things we can ask ourselves is, why is that? Well, across the OECD, over 20% of children do not achieve the basic minimum skills for full functioning in a modern society. And so 22% of children enter school with developmental problems. And disadvantaged children show 5 times higher levels of low literacy. And this is particularly important. 1 in 3 disadvantaged children start school with poor language. They can speak, they can tell you their name, they can say a simple sentence, but much more than that, they have difficulty. Okay. So disadvantaged groups have greater risk for poor health, social, emotional, and behavioral problems, attention, cognitive, and language problems, which in turn affect literacy, numeracy, social skills, employability, health, adjustment, and criminality. Now, the impact of poverty, as I've said, upon childhood is persistent. And early experience is critical in this link because interactions drive development. Now, if you only remember 3 words of what I say today, remember those 3 words. Interactions drive development. Now, we have 2 arguments for investing in early childhood. One is a moral argument. We should all be doing whatever we can to help our fellow human beings, okay? But there's also an economic argument. When my neighbor commits a crime, I pay for it. I pay for the police, I pay for the courts, I pay for the jails. It's through my taxes. When my neighbor is on social welfare, I pay for it again through my taxes. So we all pay for the poor development that children in disadvantaged circumstances show. So it would help us all if we could reduce those problems. Now, early childhood education can help improve the development of all children. The benefits of early childhood education are greatest for disadvantaged children. So if we look here, again from UK evidence, this is evidence taken in the 1990s. I'll tell you why it's relevant. It was taken in the 1990s shortly. In the blue line, the blue lines represent the 20% income bands of children where they didn't have any kind of early childhood education or care before they go to school. Okay? The red lines represent where they did have some kind of early childhood education care before starting school. And we can see that the percentage of developmental delay is improved by all children having some kind of early childhood education and care. Okay? Now, poverty increases the risk of poor literacy and numeracy, school failure, unemployment, antisocial behavior and criminality, substance abuse, mental and physical health problems. So we want to try to reduce these problems. Now, one aspect we can look at are adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences will include things like being born in poverty, a parent having a mental illness, parents showing abuse, parents showing neglect, a single parent, low parental education, low birth weight, poor health in early childhood, losing a parent, or homelessness. There are other risks as well, but those are some of the main ones which we come across. Now, all of these are more frequent in poor families, okay? And that's part of the reason why we get poorer outcomes for children in poor families. Now, if we do a survey of adults and ask them, did any of these things happen to you when you were a child? And then you go through all the risk factors. What you find is that 36% of adults will report no problems at all in their childhood. About 26% will report one of these factors, 16% will report two, 9% will report three, and over 12% will report four or more, okay? So these adverse childhood experiences do happen in the general population to quite an extent. And then we can look at to what extent are these adverse experiences linked with something like the probability of the child having a learning problem in childhood throughout school. And we see if you have one or two of these adverse childhood experiences, you have a 5% chance of that of a developmental problem. But as the adverse childhood experiences increase, so the risk of a learning problem also increases. So that by the time you get up to 7 adverse childhood experiences, you have a 98% chance of a learning problem, which is almost everybody. Okay? So these affect cognitive development quite clearly. But it's not just cognitive development. We can look at an aspect of emotional development, like the likelihood of depression. Here you see the odds ratio for being depressed sometime in childhood or adulthood for different levels of adverse childhood experiences. And you can see by the time you get up to 5 adverse childhood experiences, 5 or more, you have increased the risk of depression 5 times. Okay? Now, this is a little bit of neuroscience. It's not going to make you a brain surgeon, but it's simple information about neuroscience that everybody who works with children should know. At birth, we get 100 billion neurons. That's all you ever get. Okay? Now, they start to die off gradually after birth. So everything is downhill from birth onwards. Okay? I dread to think how many neurons I've lost in my lifetime. Now, brain development is largely about synapses, which are the connections between neurons. And synapses increase at roughly 700 per second in the early years. And 60% of the nutrition that you give a child in the first year of life is used in forming synapses. Okay? By age 3, 80% of synaptic connections are made. And then we get a very important process, pruning of synapses, not reinforced by experience. So if you have a synapse which forms, but then subsequently there's no other experience which reinforces that synapse, it drops out. You lose it. So use it or lose it. So synapse development influences brain plasticity. So learning from experience declines with age. Now, a man called John Cannell was a neuroanatomist. And what he did is he collected the brains from children who had died through a reason which would not have affected their brain development. And he then examined the brains of these children for different ages to map the pattern of brain development across childhood. He published a huge volume of neuroanatomy across childhood. In the UK, when I did my doctoral thesis, there was only one copy of this book in the whole of the UK. And so when I wanted to consult it, I had to be locked in a room in the British Library and not allowed to take it out and just take my notes from there. But anyway, here's 3 slides from John Cannell's work. At birth, this is the language area of the brain. At birth, we see some neurons, but very few synapses. Then we go back to look at children when they're 2 years old. We see masses of synapses for the same area of the brain, okay? Now, we go back when a child is 6 years of age, and we see a lot of synapses, but a lot less than we saw at 2. So what has happened between 2 and 6? Well, the answer to that can be looked at in this graph. This is for a graph produced by Charles Nelson, a very well-known neuroscientist. The red line represents synapses being formed in the sensory areas of the brain, like vision and hearing. And that shows a peak shortly after birth, which falls off over the first year of life. Then the blue line represents the language area of the brain. And we see a peak somewhere around 9 to 12 months, which falls off to around 4 to 5 years of age. Then the green line represents higher cognitive functions like reasoning, which peak around 4 years and then fall off towards adolescence. Now I'm going to focus just on the blue line, just the blue line. You see a peak around 9 to 12 months, which falls off to 4 to 5 years. Now, when you see that peak at 9 to 12 months, your first thought might be, that's when most language is taking place. But it's not. Most language is taking place in that fall-off period up to 4 to 5 years. Because what is happening through evolution, the brain has evolved so that by the end of the first year of life, the child is capable of learning any language which might ever exist in human beings. But of course, the child does not learn every language. The child only learns the language of its culture. So what happens is all the synapses which have to do with the language the child hasn't heard drop out. And so only the ones which are relevant to the language the child hears stay in. So that's why that period up to 4 to 5 years is the critical period for language development. So, of course, this is the period before school, and it's when people in early childhood education are working with the children. So what the experiences they offer the children are going to have a critical effect on the child's language development. Similarly, the kinds of experiences the parents give to the child in those years are going to have a critical effect on the child's long-term development. So child's language development is particularly important for cognitive, educational, and social development. A child with poor language at age 3 will be at risk of their interventions taken. Now, why do I say specifically 3? Well, for 2 reasons. One is, if you look at development over the first 2 years of life, it tends to be very unstable. So some children will show a very steady upward gradient. Other children will go flat, and then they suddenly show a shoot up like that. So it's difficult to get a good measure of development in those first couple of years. But by age 3, that's all settled down. And you can get a measure which is stable and predictive of longer term development. Okay? Measuring child language at 3 is very easy. I could show you a measure. I could show you a way of doing it in 5 minutes. Okay? But age 3 is still in the middle of this sensitive period. So if you recognize a child has poor language at age 3, you still have an opportunity to increase the language environment of the child to bring that child up to a good level of language development by age 5. Leave it to age 5, and it's too late. That child will have poor language for the rest of his life, which will lead to poor literacy, which will lead to poor educational development, which will lead to an increased cost of crime, will increased risk of poor social development, increased risk of poor emotional development. If you look in the jails in China, I bet you will find a very high level of low literacy. Certainly we do in Europe. Okay? And why is that? Because what happens is those children who go through school with low literacy do very poor in the educational attainment, therefore find it difficult to get a job, become unemployed, turn to crime. Okay? And actually, organized crime, the mafia and the people who run big criminal organizations, they deliberately target low-educated children, boys, particularly, and also girls, to be the foot soldiers of their organization, because they know they're the ones who they can win in to their organization and will cooperate with their organization. Okay. Okay, here's a study by 2 American psychologists called Hart and Risley in the 1990s. What they did is they took a microphone, which they sewed into the clothing of the infant or the young child. And this microphone would be linked by Wi-Fi to a recorder, which recorded samples of the language heard by the child throughout the day. So they'd know how many words children were hearing, and also other aspects of language throughout the day. And when they did this for the first 4 years of life, and they had 3 groups of children. One group of children were in homes where they were living on welfare, that is, not living entirely on social welfare in the USA. Now, those of you who've been to the USA know that if you're living on welfare in the USA, you are very, very poor. You are very disadvantaged. Okay? Then they had a group of working class families who had a job, reasonably stable home life, and so on. Then they had professional families like doctors and lawyers. And what they found was, in the welfare family, a child typically would hear about 600 words an hour in the welfare home. In the working class home, it would be about 1,200 words an hour. And in the professional home, about 2,200 words an hour. Okay? But it wasn't just the quantity of words children, it was also the quality. So we can distinguish between affirmations, well, that's nice, you're listening to me, okay? Versus prohibitions. Stop playing with your phone, okay? Okay, and what we see is, in the welfare home, we find prohibition predominate over affirmations. In the working class home, it's the opposite, affirmations predominate over prohibitions. And then in the professional home, we get a massive increase in affirmations. So it's both the quantity and the quality of the language that children hear in these homes show very big differences. Now, they recorded over the first 4 years of life, and by the time the child was 4 years old, they calculated that the child in the welfare home would have heard about 12 million words. In the working class home, it would be about 25 million words. And in the professional home, it would be about 42 million words. Now, if you give one child 30 million words more experience than another child, what do you think is going to happen? You don't need to be a genius to realize that's probably going to be linked to the children's language development. And that's exactly what we find. Big differences in language development linked to the amount of words those children have heard over those years. But experience has other consequences. There are several studies now which show that the actual language experience of the child actually alters the structure of the brain. For example, a recent study found that 4 to 6-year-old children who experienced more conversations during story reading had more developed language skills over and above the effects of the quantity of words. Okay, so that's a behavioral difference. But when they did brain imaging of these same children, they found that the brain imaging revealed more activation in the language area of the brain where the children had more conversations. So that implies that the experience is linked to actual changes in brain function and structure. Okay, and other studies of have found similar kinds of results. So early language development affects later life. The importance of language as a foundation for education generally, and is critical for both reading and mathematics, is a key message for educational practice and policy. The fact that disadvantaged children often enter school with poor language places them at a significant educational disadvantage. Okay. Now, as well as language development, there's another aspect of development which shows profound changes before the child even enters school. This is self-regulation. What do I mean by self-regulation? Well, it's a child's ability to regulate behavior and emotions and plays a role in becoming a competent individual. The learning of this ability starts early in life, and children become able to think before acting, control their anger and need to cry, and involves conscious and unconscious processes. So a child with good self-regulation will pay attention when needed, will remember instructions, will manage their emotions, will complete tasks, will wait their turn, can communicate their wants and needs, and are life ready. Okay? And a study in New Zealand, a longitudinal study in New Zealand, where they took every child born in a particular year in Dunedin, a city in New Zealand, and then followed those children all the way through to the adulthood, and they're still following these children, found that self-regulation at age 5 predicted at age 30 their health. For example, drug dependence. It predicted how wealthy they became, and it predicted how likely they were to involve in crime. And in fact, it was a stronger predictor of children's outcomes than either social class or IQ. Now, what influences self-regulation? Well, age does. As children get older, the better. Gender does. Girls tend to be better at it than boys. Birth weight, low birth weight, tend to do worse than average birth weight children. Siblings. If you have 1 to 2 siblings, you tend to have better self-regulation on average. Okay, and then if you have no siblings, or if you have 3 or more. And I say that as a father of 5 children. Okay. Okay. Poverty, lower self-regulation. Mother's education, father's education, the higher the better. Socioeconomic status, the higher the better. There's something called a home learning environment, which I'll tell you about shortly. This is how much learning opportunities are provided in the home, an aspect of parenting. We find that where this is better, you get better self-regulation. Early childhood education quality and early childhood education duration, both are linked to different levels of self-regulation. So the higher, the better. Now, underlying self-regulation is a set of what we call metacognitive skills called executive functions. Okay? If we look at these executive functions across early childhood, what we see is in the first 3 years here, the first 3 years there, and here, we see a low level of development. Then, as the child gets to 3, we see this massive increase here up to age 6. And then after 6, it flattens out and be more gradual from then on. So that tells us that those years 3 to 6 are particularly critical for self-regulation development. Okay? Now that's exactly when early childhood education is taking place. Okay? So good quality early childhood education improves most aspects of development, but the most important are language development and self-regulation. These aspects of development are strongly linked to long-term development. Now, here's a study we did in the UK. It's called the Effective Preschool, Primary and Secondary Education Study. Involved over 3,000 children. It started in 1997 and carried on until 2015. We had data on these children from birth onwards. And when they were in the preschool period, 3 to 5 years, we looked at the different kinds of preschool center that these children experienced. Every kind of preschool center which existed in England at the time of the study. And we also had a group of children at the bottom who had no preschool experience at all. Okay. And then we have the data on the development of these children. We have the data on the home backgrounds of these children. We have the data on their early childhood education experience, the quality and the duration of that experience. And then as they go to school, we've got data on the schools that they went to enable us to measure the quality of the primary education and the quality of the secondary education these children receive. And we follow them right through, we actually follow them through to age 18, ultimately. We had to give up at age 18. The reason being that it became too costly to follow them anymore because they all spread out everywhere and keeping track of them just became too difficult. Okay. Now, what did we find? Now, this study has produced close to 100 publications. And I can only give you some of the key messages, okay? Now, at the start of school, we can look at measures of development of the children. And the 0 line represents the level of development of children with no preschool. So children who had 1 to 2 years of preschool are doing better than children with no preschool. But if they had an extra year of preschool, 2 to 3 years of preschool, they did better still. Then the green bars represents children who went to low quality early childhood education. The red bar is average quality early childhood education, and the blue bar is high quality early childhood education. And we see that both the duration of preschool, how many months they were at preschool, and the quality of preschool both affect their development. Okay. Now, how do these effects of preschool compare with other factors in a child's life? Well, here we see some examples of that. At the start of school, gender is a significant effect, with girls doing better than boys. Low birth weight, children do worse than average birth weight. Duration of preschool shows us quite a strong effect here. Then quality of preschool also shows an important effect here. Then social class, which we've already mentioned previously. And then the biggest factor of all, the biggest effect of all, is related to the home environment. Now, what do we mean by the home environment here? Well, in the study, when the child was 3 years old, we asked the parents about activities which might happen in the home of any 3-year-old. And we picked out 14 activities which might happen in a home, like having meals together, watching TV, somebody reading to the child, playing with other children, etc. Now, of these 14 activities, we found a certain subset of activities were consistently linked to the children's development. And these were things like reading to the child, library visits, painting and drawing, playing with letters, playing with numbers and shapes, learning a song, a poem, or a nursery rhyme. And we also were able to measure how frequent these activities were. For example, we might say to the mother, Does anybody read to the child at home, read to Johnny at home? And some mothers would say, oh, I can't be bothered with that. I'll leave it entirely to the school. Okay? Other mothers would say, I do it sometimes whenever I get a chance. Some would say I do it every weekend. Some might say I do it every other night. And some might say every day I do it. So we get a frequency from not at all through to very, very frequent. And we can measure, then we have an overall measure of the frequency of all of these activities. Okay? And from that, we're able to construct what we call a home learning environment index. Now, we call it a home learning environment index because what differentiates these activities from the other activities which didn't affect the child's development is they all offer a learning opportunity to the child. Okay? So that's why we call it a home learning environment. And what we found was this measure at age 3 was a very strong predictor of later development all the way through to adulthood. Now, we've repeated this in most European countries and also North American countries. And we found the same effects in all of those countries of consistent links between this aspect of early experience and long-term development. Now, in the study, we had 142 different kinds of early childhood education centers or preschool. And our statistical techniques allowed us to analyze how much each preschool boosted development, having allowed for all the other factors in the child's life. And so we were able to pick out which of the preschools were most effective in boosting development and versus the other preschools which are not so effective. So we picked out a subsample of a very effective preschools and then a subsample of not effective. And we sent qualitative researchers into those preschools to get a record of the experiences of children in those preschools. So they would interview the parents, they would interview the staff, they would observe what is happening with the children in the preschool. And typically it took about 3 weeks to collect all of this data for each preschool. But they didn't know which were the effective set preschools and which were the ineffective preschools. Okay, they were blind to that. When they finished collecting the data, they brought it back to the office and we said, okay, now we'll tell you which were the effective preschools and which were the ineffective. And said, let's look at your data and see if there's anything in your data which consistently differentiates the effective preschools from the not effective preschools. And this is what we found. 5 areas were particularly important. The quality of adult-child verbal interaction. Okay, that's one important. The staff's knowledge and understanding of the curriculum, knowing what they were trying to get the children to learn. Their knowledge of how young children learn and develop, basic knowledge of child development. Their ability to help children resolve conflicts when the children fight or row over something. And lastly, their ability and activities in helping parents to support learning in the home, therefore helping the home learning environment. And preschools which are high on all of those factors tended to be the most effective. Okay. Now, as the children are getting older, we're collecting lots and lots of data on these children. And we've got data on child factors like age, gender, birth weight. We've got factors like family factors like parent education, social class, family income, number of other children, the home learning environment, which I just told you about, the quality and duration of preschool, and the quality of the school, the primary school they went to, and the quality of the secondary school they went to. I can tell you how we did that later, but no, take it. Now, because we have a large sample, over 3,000 children, we can analyze in a multi-level model, statistical model, how each of those factors affect an outcome like literacy or numeracy, sociability, or behavior problems, having allowed for all the other factors, okay? So what do we find? Well, here's an example. At age 11, every child in the country takes exactly the same assessment in literacy and numeracy. Okay, it's a national assessment. The red is literacy and the blue is numeracy. And we see family income has an important effect. The biggest effect of all is mother's education. Then we have the effect of father's education, which is about half that of mother's education. So now we know mothers are twice as important as fathers. Okay. Or we should be telling these fathers to get off their backside and do a bit more with the children, because that's why this is happening. Okay. Then we have socioeconomic status, having allowed for parent education and income. And then we have the home learning environment, which shows a very strong effect for literacy, but also a strong effect for numeracy. Now remember, this is age 11. The home learning environment was measured back when the children were age 3. So we're showing long-term effects here. Okay. Then we have the effect of going to a high-quality preschool. This is no preschool. A strong effect for literacy, but an even stronger effect for numeracy. Then we have the effect of going to a good quality primary school or a poor quality primary school, an effect for literacy, and also a stronger effect for numeracy. Now, we can learn several things from this graph. One is this: the home learning environment and preschool are the measures of the environment of children before they even start school. And it's affecting the children's development many years later. Okay, so those preschool effects are persistent. Okay, also look at the effect for preschool and the effect for primary school. The size of those effects are very similar. They're almost the same. Yet the average child in this study had been to a preschool for 18 months. They'd all been to a primary school for 6 years. That gives you an idea of the power of that preschool effect. Okay. Age 16, again, children take national assessments. And again, I've extracted from this national data the data for literacy and numeracy. And we see family income has started to have bigger effects at age 16. Now, the reason for that is this. The age 16 national assessment is what decides whether the child goes on to a university track or not. So rich parents pay for extra tuition for their children for this particular exam. So we get stronger income effects. Okay. Then you see mother's education is still very, very strong. Father's education about the same. Socioeconomic status about the same. The home learning environment is reduced a little bit in its effects, but still is a very powerful effect many years later. The preschool effects are more or less persistent to age 16. The primary school effects have dropped out for literacy and only there for numeracy. Then we see very strong secondary school effects, which are not surprising because the secondary school are basically devoting themselves to these, getting the children through these very specific exams. And also in England, we have a very unusual secondary school system in the sense that we have some of the best secondary schools in the world. We also have some terrible secondary schools. So the range in secondary schools is very, very large. So that's why we get a very big secondary school too. Okay. But look, those measures of the environment, like the home learning environment and preschools, are still having strong effects on the development of the children. Now, this is how many years? 11 years after they left the preschool. So these are long-term effects. And we did a similar analysis at age 18 rather, and found similar effects. But it's not just academic outcomes. We can look at aspects of social development, like self-regulation or pro-social behavior. And we did this at 11 and at 14. And the yellow bars represent children who went to low quality preschool. The red bars are average quality preschool, and the light blue bars are high quality preschool. And we see, allowing for all the other factors, self-regulation is affected by the quality of the preschool many years later. pro-social behavior is affected by the quality of preschool many years later. So we're seeing distinct effects on social development as well. I can show you other factors as well, all showing a similar pattern. I also analyzed the risk of the child showing special educational needs at any time in the period 5 to 16. Okay? And what we see here is the children who had no preschool on the left show a level, an odds ratio of 1. Yeah. And then we go to children who have low quality preschool, and we get a 40% reduction in the risk of special educational needs just by having low quality preschool. With average quality preschool, it reduces a little bit more, but with high quality preschool, we get almost a 60% reduction in the risk of special educational needs. Now, special educational needs are very expensive to the school system. So you can save yourself a lot of money by reducing special educational needs. Okay. We also looked at every kind of early childhood center in the UK. And we found that a particular kind of center, which we call children's centers, which combine health, childcare, education, and parent support services for families from birth to the start of school, seem to have be the most effective in improving children's development. They provide a one-stop shop for all services for families with a young child. In the UK, Children's Centre had the most beneficial influence on children's development of all types of early childhood education centers. So conclusions from this UK study. From age 2, all children benefited from early childhood education. The quality of early childhood education matters. And here's an effect which we found very surprising. Part-time early childhood education had equal benefit to full-time. So those children who went for 5 mornings or 5 afternoons had equal benefit to children who went for 5 full days. Early childhood education effects persist until adulthood. High quality early childhood education can protect the child from the effects of a low quality primary school. That is what we found. But to those children who had been to a high quality primary school and then went on to either a high quality preschool, who then went on to either a low quality primary school or a high quality primary school, there was very little difference. Those children did equally well in each kind of primary school. That is, they'd learned to learn, and provided they were given the right information, they would learn, even if the teaching was bad. Okay? On the other hand, children who went to the low-quality preschools were very much affected by the quality of the teaching they received in the primary school. And then children's centers were the most effective. Okay. This study over the years has had profound policy impact in the UK. For example, from 2004, on the basis of the results of this study, the government decided to provide free preschool from age 3 or 15 hours a week for every child in the country. Then in 2007, we had parental leave increased to 1 year after the birth because we have again our evidence. In 2013, the free preschool was moved down to 2 years of age for the 40% most disadvantaged children. Okay. Then in 2017, the 15 hours a week was increased to 30 hours a week. Also, we had a new early years curriculum, which we called the Early Years Foundation Stage. And that was largely developed on the basis of our research. This morning, I saw a preschool which is using the Early Years Foundation Stage in Shenzhen. It's a very good effect, actually. And some of the Hong Kong curriculum is based on this same curriculum. We had new training programs for staff developed on the basis of our research. We had government accepting responsibility for the early years. In 2004, when we got free preschool initially introduced, a lot of the opposition political parties voted against this. Okay. Now those same politicians in 2010 won the election. Why didn't they reverse the legislation? Well, what had happened in those years between 2004 and 2010, they saw the benefits of the free preschool education and decided to keep it. Not only did they decide to keep it, they decided to expand it. So that has been won over all the politicians. Every political party accepted providing good early childhood education was a necessity for the state, regardless of political view. Okay, which is an important change to the political culture. In 2008, the government introduced an initiative to improve the home learning environment. But what then happened in 2019, we had COVID. And that meant that initiative sort of got into trouble because you couldn't implement it properly. But it showed a good motive. We now see we have a new government in the UK now, and that's showing an increased interest in further legislation with regard to early years policy. Now, policy in the UK changed from 2000 to 2015. What is the effect of these policy changes? Well, one thing is we have a measure at the start of school for every child in the country. And what we found is that children's development at the start of school has generally gone up year by year across these years, okay, reflecting the changes in provision of early childhood education. We also have measures of preschool quality, early childhood education and care quality in 1999, and then the same measures applied in 2015. And we can look at what percentage of schools were inadequate, very, very poor quality. And we see there's quite a lot in 1999, but very few in 2015. Poor quality, a lot in 1999, but very little in 2015. Average quality, again, greater in 1999 than 2015. Whereas when we look at good quality and excellent quality, they dramatically increased in 2015. So the quality overall has increased. When we looked at matters of qualifications, we found the very lowest level of qualifications were quite present in 1999, but they disappeared by 2015, with only the higher levels of qualification being present. So it looks as though the change in manager qualifications is a factor improving the overall quality of early childhood education. When we looked at the other staff, the non-managers, we also find similar improvements in their qualification levels. So the evidence is consistent. Early childhood education and care is an essential part of the infrastructure for optimizing global well-being. For example, in Norway, France, and Switzerland, they introduced universal free preschool across the whole population, but they did it region by region by region. So if you know where a child was born and when a child was born, you can know if that child had free preschool or not. And what they found for the whole population was that preschool increased education, employment, and incomes of children. Okay. In Denmark, they have data not only on every child in the country and every parent in the country, they have data on every preschool in the country and every staff member in every preschool in the country. Tremendous data source. And what they found was they were able to extract measures of the quality of the preschool from this database. And they found that those children who went to high quality preschool, allowing for all the other factors in the child's life, showed better outcomes at age 16 than children who went to lower quality preschool. This is in a country which generally has quite high quality and which has preschool for everybody and has had for many years. In Northern Ireland, we did a parallel study to the one in England, and we find that high quality preschool increased grades in English by 2.4 times and mathematics by 3.4 times. So that means that the child's chance of getting a high grade in mathematics is 3.4 times higher if they have high quality preschool than if they have no preschool, allowing for every other factor in the child's life. Okay. The OECD have the Program for International Student Attainment, or PISA, which is used in Shanghai and in many other countries around the world, where they take random samples of 15-year-olds and then do a standard assessment for those 15-year-olds. What they found was that 15-year-olds who had attended a preschool were a year ahead of children who had not. And that preschool was strongly associated with reading at age 15 in countries that sought to improve the quality of preschool and provided more access to preschool. Here's data I extracted from the World Bank. Okay. The red line shows the percentage of children in that country who attend preschool. The blue line shows the literacy level of children in that country at the 6th grade. That's roughly age 12. Okay. Then the green line represents under 5 mortality. That is the chance of having a serious illness or dying in the first 5 years of life. And that goes in the opposite direction. But look, the blue line and the red line, they're going up almost together. Okay. Very clearly showing the strong association between preschool provision and literacy levels. Now, look at the countries. Cuba, at the end here, is doing much better than every other country in Latin America. Why is Cuba doing so well? Is it because Cuba is a rich country? No. Argentina, Peru, Uruguay, Chile are all richer countries. So why does Cuba do so well? Well, it's because Cuba uses its limited resources to give every child in the country free healthcare from pregnancy onwards. Mothers who want to work get free childcare, and every child in the country from age 3 has free early childhood education. Okay. And that's why Cuba does so well. It's not an accident that Cuba exports doctors to the rest of Latin America. Now, on the basis of this research, I built a simplified model to illustrate how these processes of development might be happening. So if we look before school on the left, we have interactions in the home, like the home learning environment. We have child characteristics like temperament and gender. We have interactions in the preschool. Now, all of these affect language development at the start of school and also self-regulation at the start of school. Now, language development, self-regulation at the start of school then go on to affect educational development at the end of school and socio-emotional development at the end of school. Now, this model implies that if you get language development and self-regulation right in the preschool period, it's highly likely those children that go on to have good educational and good socio-emotional development. Whereas if you don't get language development or self-regulation right in the preschool years, you're much more likely to have poor educational development or poor socio-emotional development. Okay? Now, this suggests that interactions drive development. Interactions both in the home learning environment, and in early childhood education and care, which is an essential part of quality of early childhood education and care, have effects on developmental outcomes. The effects in the early years for language development and self-regulation are particularly important for long-term outcomes. So this suggests interactions fostering language development and self-regulation, either in the home or in the preschool, can be particularly important aspects of quality. And therefore, preschools should make sure they provide experiences for children which are going to help language development and self-regulation. Okay? If they do that, the child will develop not only well in language development and self-regulation, they will also develop well in social development and emotional development. Now, is evidence of the kind that I've given you today, and lots of other studies as well, which led to UNESCO saying that education, early childhood education, is a right in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and is beneficial for school preparedness and later learning, and leads to higher school enrollment. It saves costs in later remedial interventions. It provides childcare to support working parents and enable older siblings to attend school, and builds the capacity of parents, and is fundamental and a foundational step in achieving the Millennium Development Goal. So international organizations are taking account of this research. The OECD have specific recommendations for every country in the world. They should be providing preschool education for every child in their country. Okay? We have gains from early childhood education. And in some of the gains would be educational attainment, special education and grade repetition reduced, behavior problems, delinquency and crime are reduced, employment, earnings and welfare dependency are improved, smoking, drug use and depression are reduced. Now, all of those changes lead to decreased costs to government. It's in terms of schooling costs, social service costs, crime costs, healthcare costs. Now you can put a monetary value to all of those decreased costs to government. How much money are you saving? You can then compare that cost of the savings to the cost of providing early childhood education. Okay? Now, various economists have done this calculation, which is called a cost-benefit analysis. Okay, and they've done it in different countries. And so some economists have come up with a cost-benefit ratio of 16:1. That is, you get back 16 times as much money as you spend on early childhood education, right? Other economists in other countries have come up with a cost-benefit ratio of 2:1. You know, any question? So, depending on who you look at and who does the calculation, you come up with different results, and also which country it applies, because the country is different. But what is interesting about every single analysis that has been done by economists is they're all positive. In every case, the savings are greater than the costs by a significant degree. The trouble is, the savings don't come through till about 10 years or more after you spend the money. Okay? So you have to wait for 10 years or so before the savings start to flow through. Now, the trouble is, politicians take a short-term view. Okay? What's going to happen next year? They don't think 10 years ahead necessarily. Now, not all governments, like some governments do take longer. But that's why it's sometimes difficult to get policy change, which would be supported by this evidence, because the politicians take too short-term a view. And in countries which have elections, they worry about winning. I want to make sure I win the election. Like, Trump and Harris. The vote's today, isn't it? I think it's today. Yeah. All they've been concerned about is what's going to win them that election. They're not thinking about what's going to happen in 10 years' time. They're only thinking about what's going to win them the election. Okay? So that's why politicians, often don't do the right thing, because they take too short-term a view. Okay, what are overall conclusions? Early childhood education benefits the whole population. The quality of early childhood education matters, and the effects persist until adulthood. High-quality early childhood education boosts development for all children, but disadvantaged children benefit the most. High-quality early childhood education can reduce special educational needs, and early childhood education is part of the infrastructure for a successful society, both economically and socially. But we should also remember, parenting, like the home learning environment, is also very, very important. In almost every study that's been done, the parenting effects are stronger than the early education effects. Okay. But overall, we need to look at the total experience of children. So if a child is spending very little time at the home because the mother is working, or both parents are working such long hours, then of course the early child education becomes even more important. Okay. So we need to look at the whole environment of the child. And as I said, if you only remember 3 words, interactions drive development. Okay. Now, I know some of you sometimes will have difficulty getting to sleep at night. So what I've done is I've provided you with some reading that you might do to help you get to sleep. Okay. That's all for now. And I'll throw the floor open for questions.